oftentimes discipline becomes this role of intimidation, and it becomes this role of aggression, it becomes this role that is fear and threat based. And so as a result, children are governed from the ages of when they're born until the age of 13, 14, 15 by fear. And then they reach this age where, hold on, I'm now as tall as you. I'm now almost as big as you. I'm not as scared of you anymore. And you know what? I don't respond to your fear or threats anymore. Fuck you. You can take your fear and your threats and you can keep using them because I'm just going to be me anyway. And so we've seen that there's a very strong counterproductive output and product of that style of discipline. I think anyone who's been around long enough now understands smacking, timeouts, and those types of things don't work. But let's explore that for a second, because there's probably some people hearing this for the first time and going, what do you mean smacking doesn't work? I was smacked every day of my life and I turned out fucking fine. It's like, yeah, well, let's explore that, And I said the same thing. I think I even said this to you, Vanessa. Like I shared a photo a couple of years ago on my Facebook page where I said, I was spanked as a child and I grew up with a condition called respect for my elders. And I remember I received a torrent of abuse. And I just remember thinking at the time, oh, look, I ended up fine. But it wasn't until years later where I started unraveling my work that I was like, holy shit, I'm not fine. And part of the not fine part of me is actually because of this style of discipline. So let's look at that. Old school discipline. What is it? Where did it come from, and why doesn't it work?
So old school discipline comes out of a theoretical perspective that I shall call behaviorism. And behaviorism is all about, we see a behavior, we don't like it, we want to squash it. And so we do whatever it takes to squash it. And I'll tell you what, a child is, whining or not cooperating or whatever, and you smack them upside the head, guess what? You probably squashed the behavior. And so if the goal was to extinguish the behavior, then you've met the goal. And that's why behaviorist approaches to discipline, everything from smacking to timeouts to consequences to removal of privileges and even the use of reward systems, those kinds of behaviorist approaches to discipline, they work if your goal is extinguish the behavior. The challenge is that in the extinguishing of the behavior, focusing just on the external presentation of the child, the behavior, we have lost sight of what's behind that. Behind that is a human being with a heart and a soul and a child who has, by definition and by perfect ordination, an as yet immature brain. We've just missed it all. And we ask children through those means of discipline to shelve their own development in order to serve us, because we like it. It's more convenient for us. It makes us feel better when the 2-year-old isn't biting and the 4-year-old can share and the 6-year-old does their chores without whining and the 12-year-old is keeping up with everything at school. It makes us feel better. And so we can sometimes sell out to these quick fix strategies in order to secure the good behavior. And then as we progressed through time, we realized, just as you have highlighted, there's a lot of deleterious outcomes connected to that kind of parenting. Outcomes such as we have ruptured the relationship between ourselves and our children. Outcomes such as our children learn that they must perform in order to be worthy, valuable, and accepted in this life that they are living. Outcomes that include, a lot of problematic things in terms of the template that we have designed for them over the life course. We even know from brain imaging studies that the area of the brain that fires up during physical abuse of a child is the same area of the brain firing up when we have used things like timeouts and those kinds of physical isolation techniques.
And I'm so glad you went there, because obviously, I'm a big fan of Gabor Mate, and one of his, I guess you could say, guiding scientific principles is understanding the trauma brain and understanding the impacts of trauma, what it has on the brain, but more importantly, of the development of the neuroanatomy of the brain and also blood flow. And so I know he's found correlations between, and he refers to addiction and trauma being a spectrum. On down one end of the spectrum, we've got light trauma, which might be, the loss of privileges. And at the other end, we've got, severe emotional and physical abuse. What I'm curious to know is, how do we as parents first of all, understand the importance of safety, but why is safety so important? Because if we don't create this safe space, well, their brain's going to potentially maldevelop. But what does that mean? Like in the context of your work, if a child doesn't feel safe and their brain responds the same way to, a timeout or a physical discipline as it would to a trauma, what are we actually doing to that brain?
Mm-hmm. And so the brain will grow in a way that is highly adaptive to the circumstances around the child. And so if a child is living in an environment where emotional safety is constantly in question, alongside physical safety perhaps, but that safety in general is in question, then the child has to have a nervous system that is vigilant, that is fired up, that is on guard, that is waiting for the other shoe to drop all the time. And so their brain, in a miraculous, incredible way, will adapt to that reality. Now think about what that brain then becomes very good at. That brain becomes very good at being stressed. That brain becomes very good at being dysregulated. Not so good at getting itself settled back down to calm, right? And so now fast forward 30 years when that child's an adult, what does that child look like in their relationships when things become frustrating or hard? What does that child look like in their job when things become frustrating or hard? They're going to look like somebody who struggles to manage emotion and hang on to themselves. And probably underneath that, they will have this enduring belief system that they're not valued, they're not worthy, they're not safe.
There you have it, guys. Thanks for tuning in to Unstoppable with me, your host, Kerwin Rae. And please do not forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you get to see all of these interviews in the flesh. Share this podcast with your friends. I would love to hear what you guys think. Thanks for joining us.